Once upon a time, the countryside where Nari lived was a land of abundance and life. Golden rice fields stretched endlessly to the horizon, always rustling in the wind like a gentle symphony of nature. The seasons came and went with predictability, and the villagers never feared hunger. Every early morning, before the sun even peeked over the bamboo groves, the air would hum with the buzzing of thousands of bees flying between flower beds and vegetable gardens. Rows of melons, gourds, and squashes were pollinated regularly, yielding heavy, healthy fruit. Children ran and played through the fields while adults laughed and chatted merrily. The whole village breathed in a rhythm that was warm, simple, and full. But then, everything began to change. In the name of higher yields, people started using more and more pesticides. The wildflowers that once grew along the rice paddy edges where bees used to gather gradually disappeared. The green meadows were burned away, replaced by concrete and chemicals. No one paid attention at first, but one by one, the bees began to vanish. The buzzing faded. The graceful flight paths between blossoms disappeared. After just a few seasons, the flowers bloomed with no fruit to follow. The rice fields yellowed and withered as the soil lost its nutrients. The rains became infrequent, and long, scorching droughts dried the village wells. The farmers had no choice but to abandon their fields. Some moved to the city to work on construction sites. Others found jobs in factories. One by one, the houses were shuttered, the fields left untended. Only Nari's family remained, just 3 of them clinging to the land their ancestors once nurtured. Nari still remembered the sound of buzzing bees from the past, the way they danced through the tomato vines heavy with ripe fruit. But now, all that remained was the wind sighing through barren fields and the weary breaths of her parents each evening. The countryside that once pulsed with life had become a long, sorrowful song without end. In an old tiled roof house nestled among the parched fields, Nari grew up with scorching days and flower seasons that no longer had bees. She was an only child, living with her parents, 2 diligent farmers who still believed in the land, even when the soil had lost its richness. In the mornings, she helped her father carry water to nourish the few surviving vegetable beds in their garden. In the afternoons, she followed her mother to the fields to pull weeds, her eyes silently observing the stunted rice stalks swaying weakly in the wind. Though only 12 years old, Nari already understood what a failed harvest meant, what it felt like when crop prices fell to nothing. But what hurt her more than anything else was something different: the absence of bees. When she was little, every morning began the same way. She'd run out to the garden, stretching out her hands to greet the tiny bees drifting past. She once counted over 20 bees hovering around the patch of daisies her mother planted near the porch. She had given them names: Bong, Bim, Bao, Vung, like little silent friends. But now, those names lived only in her memory. When her grandmother was still alive, she had been the only beekeeper in the village. Her beehive sat in a shaded corner of the garden, where wildflowers bloomed all year round. Her grandmother used to say, "Bees are the soul of life. Wherever bees remain, there will be flowers, sweet fruit, and hope." Nari hadn't understood it all then. But now her grandmother was gone, the hive was empty, and the flowers in the garden had long stopped blooming. Every night, Nari sat by the window, staring at the faint yellow porch light, holding her grandmother's old notebook, the one she called the Bees' Secrets. Inside were pages of notes on the flowers bees loved, how to build hives, their breeding seasons. Nari didn't know if any of it still mattered, but she read it over and over again, as if holding on to the final thread of a spring that once was. Her parents had started talking about selling the land. During meals, they ate in silence. Her father's sun-worn hands trembled slightly whenever he spoke of leaving to find work elsewhere. Her mother wiped her tears behind her scarf and said, "There's nothing left here worth staying for." But Nari wasn't ready to leave. Inside her, there was still a corner of the garden that hadn't withered. There was still a memory of buzzing wings and sunlit mornings. And more than anything, there was still hope that somewhere out there, the bees hadn't completely disappeared. And if she could find them, maybe, just maybe, she could bring this land back to life, bring back a true spring. Mo. One gloomy afternoon, during the harshest dry season in years, the sky hung heavy and gray, as if even it could no longer bear to look down at the parched earth below. Rain hadn't fallen in 8 months. Nari's family's rice field, their only remaining possession, had withered and died just the week before. The yellowing stalks twisted and collapsed like exhausted soldiers fallen on a barren battlefield. The chickens in the coop had grown fewer, and the fish in the drying pond lay still, awaiting their end. That evening, after a dinner of plain rice and salted dried vegetables, Nari's father set down his porcelain bowl. The soft clink sounded like the shattering of hope. He looked at her mother, then at Nari, his eyes more tired than she had ever seen. "We have to leave." No one responded right away, not out of surprise, but because all three had sensed this moment coming for a long time. Yet hearing it spoken aloud from her father's own lips felt like a verdict, and Nari's heart dropped into a void. Her mother gently ran a hand through her prematurely graying hair and murmured, "It's easier to find work in the city now. We can't live forever on these withered grains of rice." No one cried, but the silence that followed hurt more than tears. It was the earth's quiet lament, the unspoken farewell of lost harvests, the silent breaking of a young heart still desperately trying to hold on to a world already starting to crumble. Nari bolted from the house, barefoot, running toward the end of the garden where her grandmother once kept bees. The grass there was dry and brittle, snapping under her feet. She collapsed to the ground, clutching the small wooden stool her grandmother used to sit on. Her tears came fast and uncontrollably. She whispered, "Grandma, I'm not ready to leave. I don't want to abandon this place. I can't." That night, as the wind howled through dead branches and darkness wrapped itself around the old house, Nari lay holding her grandmother's notebook, clutching it like a fragment of memory, a last shard of hope. And in the haze of her dreaming, a thought flickered to life, like a candle burning faintly at the end of a long tunnel. If bees were once the soul of this land, then I must find a way to bring that soul back, even if I have to go far, even if I must go alone. The next morning, Nari rose early, her eyes no longer filled with sorrow. She knew what she had to do, not just to save the fields, but to save her own heart and the fading hope of those about to give up. Momé? That morning, as the first sunlight slipped through the brittle leaves, Nari had already risen. Her parents were still asleep, or perhaps they simply lay still, no longer dreaming in a world that had stopped giving them reasons to. Quietly, she packed a few belongings, a small bottle of water, a cloth pouch of dried rations, her grandmother's worn notebook, and a small bag of lavender seeds her mother had once bought at a distant marketplace long ago. Lastly, she opened the old wooden box in her grandmother's room, the place where the beekeeping tools had been kept. A mesh veil, a wax-cutting knife, a jar of dried beeswax, and a broken honeycomb frame. She ran her fingers across the wooden surface, feeling the cracks of time like scars upon the earth, painful, but not lifeless. Tucked inside the frame, a torn piece of paper held her grandmother's crooked handwriting. "If one day the bees disappear, plant the flowers they once loved." And so Nari set out, alone, no map, no plan. Only her heart to guide her and the pages of that old notebook filled with scattered notes on bees fragments that, to her, had become a scripture of life. She knew that bees didn't come just for nectar. They sought sunlight, gentle breezes, places filled with friendly blooms, lavender, daisies, mint, rosemary. She remembered her grandmother's words, "If you want the bees to return, create a place where they feel sapheno poison, no noise, no hands that destroy." Her small feet passed through desolate landsfields abandoned, soil cracked open like the earth's own wounds. She walked past deserted factories, dried-up rivers, and people who now only knew how to bow their heads and survive. Each night, Nari sat by a flickering flame, rereading every line: how to tend a hive, how to recognize a queen, how to split colonies once the hive grows full. In her imagination, the buzzing had already returned, soft as a breath, yet powerful as rebirth. "I'm not looking for bees," she whispered to herself. "I'm looking for the heart of my village." No one came to send her off. No one believed what she was doing was possible. But when everyone else chose to leave, she chose to stay, and when everyone fell silent, she became the final voice of hope. Because she believed, if even one flower still blooms for the bees, and one child still dares to search for them, then the bee sand life itself will find their way back. Shah. On the third day of her journey, Nari's feet were bloodied from cuts caused by sharp stones and thorny shrubs, but she didn't stop. Hunger only made her eat more slowly. Thirst only made her treasure every precious drop of water left in her bottle. The only thing that never ran dry was her determination. The resolve to find even the faintest sign of beesby in a distant hum or a fleeting shadow crossing a field of dead grass. That afternoon, after crossing a dry ravine littered with jagged rocks, Nari noticed a thin ribbon of smoke rising from the edge of a sparse forest. Unlike the mechanical smokestacks she had seen before, this smoke had a gentle scent like burnt honey drifting on the wind. Her heart pounded. Someone was here, and that someone might be living with bees. Following a mossy path lined with brittle wildflowers, Nari stepped into a hidden garden tucked within the foresta place that felt almost magical amidst a world falling apart. Patches of daisies, lavender, mint, and dandelions bloomed randomly, painting the space with soft color, and beside a small wooden hut stood a row of wooden boxes, beehives. And then a buzzing sound, gentle, trembling like the first breath of life after a long slumber. "You're not from the city," came a voice old but warm from behind. Nari turned to see an old man with long silver hair and sun-worn skin. But his eyes still held the glow of someone who carried something beautiful deep inside. She nodded, her voice trembling. "I'm looking for bees." The old man's name was Moke was silent for a long while, then pointed to a wooden bench beneath a tree, next to a blooming flower bed. "Sit down. You're the second person to find this place because of bees. The first was me, 50 years ago." That night, under the soft glow of an oil lamp and the scent of mint tea freshly picked from the garden, Nari told him about her village, about the dying fields, and the quiet promise she made to her grandmother to bring life back. Mock listened in silence. His eyes glowed with each word she shared, as if an old fire within him had been rekindled by a fragile yet fiercely burning spark of hope. "Do you know how to care for bees?" he asked. "I have my grandmother's notebook," she replied, "and I have a heart big enough to learn." Moke smiled, and for the first time in years, that smile wasn't just an expression, it was a yes. "Then we begin tomorrow morning. Together, you and I, we will teach the bees how to trust humans again. Monet." The next morning, before the dawn light had a chance to lift the thin veil of mist that clung to the treetops, Nari and Mr. Moke began a task she had never imagined herself doing, learning how to care for bees, starting from the smallest things. Mr. Mock guided her through the garden, where he had quietly maintained a small ecosystem just enough for a few surviving bee colonies to find their way back. "Bees don't just need flowers," he explained, gently pointing to a cluster of mint. "They need safety. No chemicals, no loud noises, no human interference." Under his guidance, Nari learned how to cleanse a hive using lemongrass leaves. She learned to recognize worker bees from the queen. She learned the correct distance to keep so as not to startle them. She practiced breathing slowly each time she opened a wooden hive box, not just to stay calm, but because even human breath can frighten bees. Together, they began to heal the earth not with machines, but with bare hands and patience. Each handful of dry soil was mixed with decomposing leaves, old roots, and dew water gathered overnight. Nari sowed her mother's lavender seeds, while Mr. Moke rubbed a bit of old beeswax on the hive rims to attract bees to their new home. Each day, as the bees flew out and returned, Nari learned to recognize the different songs of their buzzing: the hum when they found a new flower, the alarm when danger neared the hive, and even the soft, rhythmic flutters like a quiet thank you from nature itself. Before long, the first rows of flowers began to bloom. Not vibrant like painted gardens, but hesitant and real like life, slowly opening its eyes after a long sleep. Rumors of the bee garden began to spread. Farmers who had once abandoned the village and children raised in cities of cold concrete began to arrive. They didn't say much, but they came with seeds, with compost made from kitchen scraps, with buckets of water carried from miles away to pour at the base of a single seedling. One brought a lemon tree, another an heirloom corn seed. Someone even brought a memory of the sound of cicadas from long ago. The barren soil slowly turned rich, again nurtured by hands that understood the value of what had been lost. And the besants, declared extinct now, danced thickly across the small garden in golden clouds. Amidst it all, Nari stood silently, her heart swelling with a feeling she couldn't quite name, part gratitude, part rebirth. She hadn't just brought the bees back. She had brought back hope. Mene. That spring came late, but it was breathtakingly beautiful. No longer the scorched yellow of wild grass, no longer the dusty path choked with dry soil. Instead, there were real rows of blooming flowers basking in the season's first sunlight. Clusters of soft lavender purple, white daisies gently nodding in the breeze, and tiny green shoots pushing up through the moist earth like quiet little miracles, fragile, yet fiercely alive. And above all, the bees had returned. Golden swarms buzzed through the air, fluttering from flower to flower, landing delicately on each blossom to sip nectar alive and to preserve life. The buzzing that once existed only in old books had become the soundtrack of the bee garden, a patch of land once barren, now transformed into an oasis of hope. News spread like the wind. Former villagers, those who had left in despair, began to return. They brought no money, only memories. A worn hoe, seed packets tucked away in dusty corners, a photograph of the once green fields. Old Mr. Kai the farmer, who once declared, "No one can save this land," came back with tears brimming in his eyes. Miss Huang, who had left her post as a primary school teacher to work in the city, returned with children's books teaching how to recognize flowers. Even city-born children arrived, laying their hands in real soil for the first time, breathing in the scent of real flowers and hearing the sound of real bees. And then the miracle unfolded. Plants began to bear fruit. No longer stunted rice or flowers that never seeded but ripe, red tomatoes, crisp, sweet cucumbers, golden rows of corn. It was as if nature herself was speaking. When the bees return, life returns. Nari, now older, still rose early each morning to check the hives with Mr. Moke. She kept her habit of talking to the bees as if they were her oldest friends. And the bees in their own way responded with rhythmic flights and an explosion of blossoms unlike anything seen before. One morning, while standing amidst the flowers, Nari turned to Mr. Mock, her eyes shining with joy. "Grandpa, I think, the bees didn't abandon us. They were just waiting for us to remember how to love nature again." Mr. Mock nodded, his voice hoarse but warm. "And all it takes is one person brave enough, one seed planted at the right moment, and life will find its way back." Many years later, the bee garden was no longer just a small corner of Revivalet, had become the green heart of a countryside that was once barren. People no longer called it by old names like the Drought Zone or the Dead Land, but by the name Nari had written on the wooden sign at the village gate, where life begins again. Travelers from afar didn't come just to visit, but to learn how to plant a seed, how to build a hive for bees, how to listen to the wind, and how to watch the pollination dance of each tiny wing. On golden afternoons, adults watered plants together, children placed bowls of clean water for bees to rest, and everyone looked up as petals trembled gently under the wings of passing bees, a tender symphony in motion. Nari was now a young woman. Around her neck, she always wore a small pendant inside it, a piece of an old honeycomb, the last keepsake from her grandmother. She had become a guide for the new generations, telling the story of a land that once ran dry, and of the dream of a child who simply refused to give up. Every year, at the start of blossom season, the village held a small festival there, where no fireworks, no stage, only long wooden tables filled with honey jars, fresh flowers, and handwritten letters to nature. Amid the laughter and joyful chatter, one moment was always kept sacred. The entire village stood still, silently listening to the hum of bees flying over the fields of flowers. And in that silence, everyone understood. No money, no gold, no diamonds, no oil could ever buy that precious sound, the buzz of life. Because life does not begin with what sparkles the most. It begins with a seed sown in faith. And Nari, the girl who once went alone in search of the bee shad, become a symbol of that truth. She didn't save the world with magic. She simply didn't give up. And because of that, the world was saved. Final message. No bees, no food. No flowers, no harvest. But with one seed, one hand, and a heart that dares to love nature, life will always find its way back. If the story of the last seed has touched your heart, please help us spread this message even further. Like, share, and subscribe to support stories that speak for nature, for life, and for the small but extraordinary things like a bee, a seed, or a heart that refuses to give up. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next videos, where every story carries hope, love, and awakening. We don't need to be great to save the earth. We only need to begin just like Nari did. Man,